The Duke of Thornfield spent his life building an empire for the crown, pledging his heart to duty above all else, until her smile stopped him in his tracks. A single glance from a woman with no title, no wealth, and nothing but a warmth that melted his iron resolve. Now, standing on the edge of everything he's worked for, he must choose: remain bound by duty, or risk it all for the one thing he never knew he needed. But the deeper he falls, the harder it becomes to escape the trap of the crown and the love he never thought he'd want. Will he walk away from everything, or is it already too late? Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Weight of the Crown. The scratch of quill on parchment was the only sound in the Duke of Thornfield's private study, save for the relentless tick of the mantel clock, marking the passage of another hollow evening. Edmund Ravenswood sat alone at his mahogany desk, long after the corridors of Whitehall Palace had emptied of ministers and clerks. The weight of England's trade negotiations spread before him like a battle map. A single oil lamp burned, casting shadows that danced across walls lined with leather-bound volumes and framed maps of territories he'd helped secure for the crown. The marble fireplace stood cold and dark. Edmund never bothered to light it, even on chill evenings. Comfort seemed an indulgence when duty demanded his attention. His eyes drifted from the French textile agreement to the portrait hanging above the fireplace. His father, the late Duke, stared down with the same stern expression Edmund had learned to mirror perfectly. Those painted eyes seemed to follow him, judge him, remind him. 34 years, Edmund thought, setting down his quill. 14 of them in service to the crown. What do I have to show for it? A title, a legacy, an empty house. The memory arrived unbidden, as it often did in these solitary hours. His father's bedchamber, the smell of illness and impending death, the old Duke's hand gripping his with surprising strength. Edmund. His father's voice had been weak but unyielding. The Ravenswood name has served the crown for 2 centuries. Above all else, above comfort, above desire, above everything. Promise me. Promise you'll never forget your purpose. I promise, father. Say it. Say what matters. Edmund had swallowed hard, feeling the weight of generations settling on his shoulders. The crown is all that matters. His father had smiled then, satisfied, and released his hand. He died 3 days later. The promise had become Edmund's compass, his measuring stick, his prison. The sound of footsteps on marble broke through his reverie. Edmund didn't look up. He knew that confident stride. You're working late again. Lord Geoffrey Wycliffe entered without knocking, carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of brandy. I saw the light from the courtyard. The French ambassador expects a response by Friday. Edmund gestured to the documents before him. These tariff structures won't negotiate themselves. Geoffrey set a glass before him and poured with practiced ease. They also won't vanish if you sleep occasionally. He settled into the leather chair across from the desk, studying his friend with concern. Though, I suppose congratulations are in order. Your trade proposal passed unanimously today. Not unanimously. Edmund accepted the brandy, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Lord Pemberton voted against it, naturally. Pemberton votes against anything you propose. His jealousy is becoming tiresome. Geoffrey swirled his glass. Did you see his face when the final count was announced? Edmund had seen it. The memory surfaced with uncomfortable clarity, Pemberton's expression, as he'd approached Edmund after the session, all false courtesy and barely concealed venom. Enjoy your victory, Ravenswood, Pemberton had said, his smile tight. The king's favor is a fickle thing. One day you're indispensable. The next, he'd shrugged elegantly. Well, fortunes change. Edmund had dismissed him with cool politeness, as he always did. Pemberton was a minor irritation, nothing more. Pemberton is harmless, Edmund said now, taking a sip of brandy. The burn was welcome. All ambition, no substance. Geoffrey's expression suggested disagreement. Ambitious men are never harmless when they feel overlooked. He's been gathering supporters, Edmund. Quietly, but deliberately. Then let him gather. Edmund set down his glass. I serve the king. My position is secure. Is it duty that makes you so confident, or exhaustion that makes you careless? Geoffrey leaned forward. When was the last time you left London? Attended a ball? Did anything that wasn't in service to the Crown? I attended Lady Ashford's musical last month, where you spent the entire evening discussing agricultural subsidies with the Austrian ambassador. That doesn't count. Geoffrey paused, then added carefully, There's more to life than duty, Edmund. Is there? The question came out more bitter than Edmund intended. He softened his tone. Forgive me, it's late. Was there something specific you needed, or did you come merely to lecture me on my habits? Geoffrey's expression shifted to something more serious. Actually, I came about your mother's charitable trust. There's a family in Bath requiring assistance, the Westbrooks. Edmund felt a flash of irritation. Send Carruthers. He manages the trust accounts. Protocol requires you to personally assess their circumstances. You know this. Geoffrey produced a folder from his coat. Your mother made you promise to oversee the trust personally. See the people, Edmund, not just their paperwork. Those were her words. Another promise. Another chain. Edmund's jaw tightened. I have the French ambassador arriving Friday, the Austrian trade delegation the week following. I cannot simply abandon my responsibilities to honor your mother's final wish. Geoffrey's voice was gentle but firm. Edmund, she established this trust to help families destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. She wanted you involved personally because she knew you'd become this. He gestured at the desk, the documents, the cold fireplace. All duty, no humanity. The words stung because they were true. Edmund reached for the folder. 3 days, Geoffrey. No more. 3 days is sufficient. Geoffrey stood, relief evident. The Westbrooks are expecting you Thursday afternoon. I've taken the liberty of arranging your accommodation in Bath. Of course you have. Edmund managed a slight smile. Is there anything you haven't organized? Your happiness. That, I'm afraid, you'll have to manage yourself. Geoffrey moved toward the door, then paused. Get some sleep, Edmund. The treaties will still be there tomorrow. After Geoffrey's footsteps faded, Edmund opened the Westbrook file with the mechanical efficiency of someone accustomed to processing information quickly. His eyes scanned the contents with practiced detachment. Mr. Henry Westbrook, deceased 8 months, gambling debts exceeding £3,000, estate in ruin, assets seized, widow, Margaret Westbrook, age 52, poor health, daughter, Lady Amelia Westbrook, 27, unmarried, managing household affairs, 2 sons, Thomas and William Westbrook, ages 14 and 12, currently enrolled at Ashford Grammar School. Edmund's eyebrows rose slightly at the last detail. Ashford Grammar was not inexpensive, yet the family was destitute. He read further. Note, tuition maintained through Lady Amelia's personal efforts. Application for trust assistance submitted with detailed repayment proposal. Lady Amelia has requested no charity, only temporary assistance with clear terms for gradual reimbursement. Unusual. Most beneficiaries approached the trust with desperate pleas and empty promises. This woman, Lady Amelia, had submitted what amounted to a business proposal. Edmund set the page aside, intending to return to his treatise, but his eyes caught on a single line in the property assessment. The Westbrook Garden, once renowned in Bath society, is maintained personally by Lady Amelia Westbrook, who dismissed the groundskeeper to reduce expenses. She tends the roses daily in memorial to her late father. Something about that detail lodged in his mind. A woman of the gentry, doing manual labor to preserve her father's memory. There was something both foolish and touching about it. Sentiment over practicality, devotion over dignity. Edmund shook his head. Sentiment was irrelevant. This was a straightforward case. Assess needs, allocate funds, establish repayment structure, assign oversight. He could accomplish it in an afternoon and return to work that actually mattered. He closed the file and turned back to his treatise, but the words blurred before him. The clock ticked relentlessly. The oil lamp flickered, casting shadows that seemed to grow longer, darker. Edmund looked around his study, his sanctuary, his prison. Maps of Europe covered one wall, marking territories and trade routes. Shelves of legal texts and historical volumes lined another. His father's portrait dominated the fireplace wall, those stern eyes ever watchful. What did he have, truly? A title inherited, not earned. A position granted by birth, not merit. Respect born of fear and formality, not genuine regard. An empty townhouse in Mayfair that he visited only to sleep. No wife, no children, no warmth. Only duty. Edmund picked up the Westbrook file once more, opened it to that curious detail about the garden. 3 days in Bath, he murmured to the empty room. Then back to what matters. He rose and moved to the window. Beyond the glass, London sprawled in darkness, fog rolling through streets lit by gas lamps that flickered like dying stars. Somewhere out there, people were living, loving, laughing, feeling things beyond obligation and responsibility. Edmund pressed his palm against the cold glass. This is enough, he told himself, as he had countless times before. This is purpose. This is meaning. This is what Father wanted, what Mother expected, what the Ravenswood name demands. But standing alone in his study, surrounded by the evidence of his achievements and the emptiness of his life, Edmund Ravenswood wondered, just for a moment, if duty was truly all that mattered. The clock struck midnight. In 3 days, he would travel to Bath to assess a destitute family's circumstances. He would meet a widow and her daughter, review their finances, make his determination, and return to London. It would be routine, efficient, forgettable. Edmund had no way of knowing that in a small garden in Bath, a woman with chestnut hair and hazel eyes was tending roses under the stars, believing herself alone and unremarkable. He had no way of knowing that her smile would soon make him question everything he'd ever been taught about duty, legacy, and the meaning of a life well lived. For now, he simply closed the file, extinguished the lamp, and left his study, walking through silent corridors toward an empty house, carrying the weight of the crown like a man who'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Chapter 2. The Woman in the Garden. The ducal carriage rolled through Bath's elegant streets as morning sunlight gilded the honey-colored stone buildings that gave the city its distinctive glow. Edmund watched through the window as they passed the Roman baths, catching the faint, sulphurous smell that always hung over this part of town, a reminder of the ancient waters that had drawn the fashionable and infirm here for centuries. His carriage, gleaming black lacquer bearing the Ravenswood crest in gold, seemed almost vulgar against Bath's genteel modesty. Where London was all grandeur and power, Bath maintained a quieter dignity, faded elegance, clinging to former glory. They turned onto Royal Crescent, then into the less fashionable streets beyond, finally stopping before a narrow townhouse on a respectable but declining street. Edmund studied the building with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to assessing value. The address was proper enough, but the structure showed unmistakable signs of financial strain. Paint peeling from window frames, one shutter hanging slightly askew, the iron gate touched with rust at its hinges. Yet someone had tried. Window boxes overflowed with geraniums and trailing ivy. The front steps were scrubbed clean, and the brass door knocker, though aged, gleamed with recent polishing. Pride maintaining dignity despite poverty. Edmund recognized it because he'd seen it in his mother during her final illness, refusing to acknowledge pain, insisting on proper dress even when bedridden. There was something both admirable and heartbreaking in such determination. His coachman opened the door and handed him down. Edmund straightened his coat, adjusted his cravat, and assumed the bearing expected of a duke, shoulders back, expression neutral, every inch the aristocrat assessing a supplicant. Before he could approach the door, it opened. An elderly butler stood in the doorway, his face creased with nervous anxiety. "Your Grace." The man executed a proper bow, though his movements suggested arthritis. "We, Lady Westbrook, wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." Edmund noted the butler's livery, spotless but frayed at the cuffs, brass buttons polished to brilliance but clearly old. The man's shoes were worn thin at the soles, yet meticulously maintained. Another example of dignity preserved through sheer determination. "I prefer to manage my schedule efficiently," Edmund replied with characteristic impatience. "I trust this doesn't present an insurmountable difficulty." "Of course not, Your Grace. If you'll wait in the morning room, I'll inform Lady Westbrook of your arrival." The butler Davies, according to the file, stepped aside with practiced deference. "May I offer you tea while you wait?" "That won't be necessary." Davies led him through a narrow entrance hall where faded portraits of Westbrook ancestors gazed down with expressions of former prosperity. The morning room was small but maintained with obvious care. Wallpaper that had once been expensive now showed age around the edges. Furniture that was quality but worn. Fresh roses in a chipped porcelain vase. "I'll inform Lady Westbrook immediately, Your Grace." Edmund watched Davies retreat, then moved to examine the room more carefully. He should sit, wait patiently, maintain the proper distance between benefactor and supplicant. Instead, He found himself drawn to the window overlooking the back garden. What he saw stopped him completely. Where the house showed neglect, the garden was extraordinary. Roses bloomed in profusion, pink, white, deep crimson, pale yellow, their beds meticulously maintained. Gravel paths wound between plantings, raked smooth as any formal garden. Lavender bordered the walkways, and climbing roses covered a trellis near the back wall. This was not the garden of someone making do, this was the work of someone who understood beauty and refused to let it die, regardless of cost. And there, among the roses, was a young woman. She wore a simple morning dress of grey muslin, practical rather than fashionable, with sleeves rolled to her elbows in defiance of propriety. No gloves protected her hands. Her chestnut hair was pinned up loosely, tendrils escaping around her face in a way that suggested she'd been working for some time without bothering to check her appearance. She was completely absorbed in her task, pruning roses with careful attention, examining each cut before making it. Edmund watched, telling himself he was simply observing, while he waited as she moved from bush to bush with graceful efficiency. These were not the movements of someone playing at gardening. This woman knew exactly what she was doing. She paused before a particular rosebush, studying a bloom that was just beginning to open. A smile spread across her face, not the polite, practiced smile Edmund was accustomed to seeing in London ballrooms, but something genuine and unguarded. That smile transformed her entirely. It was like watching sunlight break through clouds. "There you are," she said softly to the flower, her voice carrying through the open window. "I knew you'd bloom if I was patient." Edmund felt something shift in his chest, a tightening, or perhaps a loosening. He couldn't identify which. A robin landed nearby, bold as brass, hopping close to where the woman worked. She laughed, a warm, unguarded sound that seemed to belong to the garden itself, and Edmund realized he was staring. He never stared. Staring suggested interest, and interest suggested vulnerability, and vulnerability was something Edmund Ravenswood had trained himself to avoid. Yet he couldn't look away. The woman turned toward the house, perhaps sensing observation. Their eyes met through the glass. Hazel eyes, he noted, intelligent and direct, with none of the calculated coyness he'd come to expect from young women of the ton. Her smile faltered in surprise. She clearly hadn't expected anyone at the window. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, Edmund frozen in place, the woman with her pruning shears still raised. Then she offered a small, questioning smile and a slight nod. Not a curtsy, she didn't know who he was, just simple acknowledgement of his presence. Edmund found himself nodding back before he could think better of it. The moment shattered when Davies returned. "Your Grace, Lady Westbrook will receive you shortly, and Lady Amelia is just coming in from the garden." Edmund turned from the window, composing his features into their usual neutrality. "Thank you, Davies. Lady Amelia." So that was her name. The daughter. The woman who maintained her father's garden and kept her brothers in school despite having no money. The woman who had requested assistance, not charity. He felt unsettled, which was unusual. Edmund prided himself on maintaining equilibrium in all situations. Footsteps approached quick, light, and the door opened. Lady Amelia entered in a rush, slightly breathless, clearly having hurried to make herself presentable. She'd removed the gardening apron and attempted to smooth her hair, but there was still a smudge of soil on her wrist that she'd missed. Her dress was simple, unfashionable by London standards, but clean and well-maintained. Her curtsy was proper but not obsequious. "Your Grace, forgive me, I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." "I arrived early," Edmund replied, noting that her voice matched what he'd heard through the window, warm, unaffected. "I hope I haven't inconvenienced you." A hint of amusement touched her eyes. "Not at all, Your Grace, though you've caught me rather literally dirty-handed." She held up her hands with disarming honesty, showing the soil still under her fingernails despite obvious attempts to clean them. "I was tending my father's roses. I'm afraid I lose track of time there," Edmund heard himself say, before he could consider whether it was appropriate. "They're beautiful. The garden." Her face lit up with obvious pleasure. "Thank you, Your Grace. It was Papa's greatest joy. I couldn't let it go to ruin, even if—" She trailed off, then finished simply, "even if circumstances have changed." The door opened again, and an older woman entered slowly, leaning on a carved walking stick. Mrs. Westbrook was frail but kind-faced, her movements suggesting both poor health and determined grace. Formal introductions followed proper courtesies, exchanged with the ritualistic precision of their class. They arranged themselves in the sitting area, the ladies on a worn settee, Edmund in a wing chair that had probably been expensive 30 years ago. Edmund launched into his prepared speech with characteristic efficiency, outlining the trust's provisions, the funding available, the terms and conditions. He'd given variations of this speech dozens of times. It was straightforward, businesslike, designed to establish clear parameters while maintaining appropriate distance. Mrs. Westbrook's response was predictably effusive. "Your Grace, you cannot know what this means to us. Your mother's generosity, and yours in continuing her work. Forgive me, Your Grace." Lady Amelia's voice was gentle but firm as she interrupted her mother. "May I ask a few questions about the terms?" Edmund paused, surprised. "Of course." She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. "What are the repayment expectations? How is the funding structured? What oversight will be required? And are there conditions regarding how the funds may be used?" Edmund found himself actually engaged rather than merely performing duty. Most beneficiaries accepted gratefully and asked no questions. This woman was assessing the arrangement like a business transaction, which was refreshing. "You seem to have concerns about accepting assistance, Lady Amelia." She met his eyes steadily. "Not concerns, Your Grace. I simply believe in understanding obligations completely. We're accepting assistance, not charity. There's a significant difference. Most people would consider the distinction academic. Most people haven't had to manage a household's collapse while maintaining their family's dignity." Her voice was matter-of-fact, not bitter. "Charity demeans the recipient. Fair assistance, with clear terms and mutual respect, preserves self-respect. I prefer the latter." The conversation shifted then, becoming something other than the formal transaction Edmund had anticipated. They discussed fund management, repayment schedules, sustainable solutions. Mrs. Westbrook sat quietly, watching with growing interest as her daughter held her own with a duke. Edmund found himself explaining more than necessary, engaging rather than dictating. When he mentioned her brother's schooling, noting that maintaining their education despite financial ruin showed commendable priorities, Amelia's expression softened. "They're good boys, Your Grace. They deserve their chance, despite our father's mistakes." No bitterness colored her words, only determined love. As the meeting concluded, Edmund realized with some surprise that he was reluctant to leave. He stood, they stood. Proper farewells were exchanged. At the door, Edmund paused. "Your father's garden. He had excellent taste in roses." That smile returned the genuine, transformative one he'd witnessed through the window. "He always said roses require patience and faith, Your Grace. You must tend them carefully, even when they're not blooming, trusting that beauty will come." Their eyes held for a moment. Edmund saw grief there, and love, and a quiet strength that had nothing to do with birth or fortune. "Wise man," he said softly. He was. Understanding passed between them, of loss, of duty, of maintaining dignity when everything else crumbles. Edmund left the Westbrook house with the afternoon sun warm on his shoulders, climbed into his carriage, and gave orders to return to London. But during the entire journey, he found himself thinking about her smile, her soil-stained hands, her refusal to accept diminishment. That night, working late in his study as always, Edmund caught himself wondering if she was in her garden under the stars, tending her father's roses with patient faith that beauty would come. It was a foolish thought, sentimental, irrelevant to his duties. Yet, he wondered nonetheless. Chapter 3. Duty and desire collide. The French ambassador's voice seemed to come from very far away, though the man sat directly across from Edmund in the Whitehall conference room. Morning light slanted through tall windows, illuminating maps of European trade routes spread across the polished table. "Your Grace." The ambassador's tone suggested this wasn't the first time he'd attempted to gain Edmund's attention. "The tariff structure on Lyon silk?" Edmund blinked, forcing his mind back from a sunlit garden in Bath, where a woman with soil-stained hands smiled at roses. "Forgive me. The tariff structure, yes. A reduction of 15% on finished goods, provided France reciprocates on English wool." He delivered the response with his usual precision, but Geoffrey, seated to his right, raised an eyebrow. Edmund never lost focus during negotiations. Never. By Wednesday's parliamentary session, Edmund's distraction had become a liability he could no longer ignore. Lord Pemberton droned on about agricultural subsidies, a topic that normally would have Edmund taking detailed notes, preparing counter-arguments. Instead, He found his pen motionless on the page as Amelia's words echoed in his mind. Roses require patience and faith. Some among us, Pemberton's voice cut through Edmund's reverie, seem distracted by matters beyond their station. Edmund's head snapped up. Pemberton was looking directly at him, a thin smile playing at his lips. The chamber had gone quiet. Several members turned to gauge Edmund's reaction. Edmund met Pemberton's gaze with cold composure. If Lord Pemberton has concerns about the agricultural proposal, perhaps he should address them directly, rather than through innuendo. Pemberton's smile widened. No concerns, Your Grace. Merely an observation. But the damage was done. As the session concluded, Geoffrey caught Edmund's arm in the corridor. You're not yourself. Geoffrey kept his voice low. What happened in Bath? Nothing happened. A routine trust matter. Edmund attempted to move past, but Geoffrey's grip held firm. Edmund, I've known you since we were boys at Eton. You've never been distracted by routine anything. Geoffrey's expression was concerned rather than accusatory. Talk to me. Irritation flared at Geoffrey for noticing, at himself for being noticeable. I'm tired, that's all. The French negotiations have been demanding. Geoffrey studied him for a long moment, then released his arm. If you say so. That night, alone in his study at Thornfield House, Edmund finally admitted the truth to himself. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about Amelia Westbrook with her intelligent questions and unguarded laugh, her refusal to accept charity, her hands gentle on rose stems, her eyes that seemed to see past every defense he'd spent a lifetime constructing. He told himself it was merely intellectual respect. She was intelligent, refreshing after the vapid society women whose conversation rarely ventured beyond weather and fashion. Nothing more than that, but sitting in the darkness, listening to the clock tick away another empty evening, Edmund knew he was lying to himself. It was everything more. The following Friday found Edmund at the Ashford estate for dinner, the purpose barely concealed behind elaborate courses and polite conversation. Lord Ashford wanted to solidify the match between Edmund and his daughter Catherine, and he'd arranged the evening with the subtlety of a military campaign. Lady Catherine Ashford was beautiful in the conventional way that London society prized blonde hair dressed in the latest fashion, blue eyes that matched her silk gown, porcelain complexion that spoke of gentle breeding. She was accomplished. Her pianoforte performance before dinner had been technically flawless, her French accent impeccable when she'd conversed with the visiting comte, her embroidered shawl a work of considerable skill. The alliance would strengthen both families politically. It was, by every measure, an excellent match. Catherine was seated beside Edmund at dinner, a placement too deliberate to be accidental. She made polite conversation the unseasonably warm weather, the upcoming season at Covent Garden, Lady Pemberton's new conservatory. Edmund played his part with practiced ease, attentive and courteous, offering appropriate responses at proper intervals. But some traitorous part of his mind kept drawing comparisons. When Catherine mentioned her garden, saying, I find roses rather demanding. I prefer less troublesome flowers like dahlias. Edmund heard Amelia's voice. Roses require patience and faith. When Catherine discussed her charity work, I organize the Ladies' Society. We send baskets to the deserving poor twice monthly. Edmund remembered Amelia's words. Charity demeans. Fair assistance preserves self-respect. After dinner, Lord Ashford cornered Edmund in his study under the pretense of offering port. Catherine is fond of you, Ravenswood. Ashford poured generous measures into crystal glasses, and the king himself has expressed approval of the match. Lady Catherine is an exemplary young woman, Edmund replied, which was both true and safe. The families have circled each other long enough. Ashford handed Edmund a glass. I propose we announce the engagement at the royal ball next month. Give society something to celebrate. Edmund should have agreed immediately. The match was advantageous, appropriate, expected. Every rational consideration supported it. Instead, he heard himself say, I would prefer to wait until after the summer recess, Lord Ashford. Ashford's eyebrows rose. Is there some impediment? Merely a preference for proper timing. It was a delay, nothing more. But it was the first time Edmund had ever delayed duty for reasons he couldn't quite articulate. As Edmund prepared to leave, Catherine walked him to his carriage, propriety maintained by staying within view of the house, but beyond hearing of the other guests. You're hesitating, she observed. That's not like you, Your Grace. Edmund turned to her, startled by her directness. I'm not hesitating, merely being deliberate. Catherine studied him with disconcerting perception. I want you to know I understand this is a political match. I don't expect love, but I do expect honesty. You'll have my honesty, Lady Catherine. Then be honest with yourself first, Your Grace, before you make promises you may regret." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Whatever or whoever has you hesitating deserves your consideration. Don't dismiss it merely because it's inconvenient to duty." She knew. Somehow, she knew his heart wasn't in this arrangement. Geoffrey was waiting at Thornfield House when Edmund returned, sitting in the darkened study, as if he had every right to be there. "How was the evening?" Geoffrey asked without preamble. "Productive." "When's the engagement to be announced?" "After summer recess." "So, you're delaying." Geoffrey leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're going back to Bath, aren't you?" Edmund didn't answer, but they both knew the truth. 3 days later, Edmund discovered a discrepancy in the trust disbursement paperwork. Lady Amelia's signature was required on certain documents, an oversight that demanded immediate correction. There was no discrepancy. Edmund had created one. He told himself it was merely thoroughness as he prepared for the journey. The Ravenswood Trust must be properly administered. Personal feelings were irrelevant. This was about duty, about honoring his mother's legacy, about ensuring proper documentation. He almost believed his own lies. Rather than taking his carriage, Edmund rode his own horse faster, more private, less formal. The summer countryside unfolded before him, fields golden with early wheat, hedgerows heavy with wild roses, the Avon Valley green and lush. He rehearsed what he would say. "Lady Amelia, protocol requires your signature on these amended documents." Professional, distant, appropriate, but his heart beat faster as Bath's spires came into view. Davies answered the door, surprise evident on his lined face. "Your Grace, we weren't expecting. I apologize for the intrusion." Edmund held up the carefully prepared documents. "A matter of paperwork requires Lady Amelia's attention. I happened to be passing through Bath and thought to deliver them personally." A flimsy excuse, and Davies' expression suggested he recognized it as such. "Lady Amelia is in the garden, Your Grace. Shall I fetch her to the morning room?" Edmund's response came too quickly. "No need. I'll speak with her there, if that's appropriate." Davies' knowing look suggested he understood far more than Edmund wished. "Of course, Your Grace." Through the morning room, as before. The garden was awash in afternoon sunlight, the air heavy with the scent of roses at their peak. Amelia stood among them, cutting blooms for the house, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face. She wore an apron over her simple dress, and she was humming a folk melody, simple and sweet. Edmund stood in the doorway, stealing this unguarded moment, watching her move from bush to bush with unconscious grace. She examined each bloom before cutting, as selective with flowers as she'd been with words during their first meeting. "Lady Amelia." She turned, and her face transformed, surprise melting into pleasure. "Your Grace, I didn't expect." She set down her shears, removing her gardening gloves. "Is something wrong with the trust?" Edmund held up the papers. "A signature is required. I apologize for disturbing you." Her lips curved in a knowing smile. "You could have sent these by post." Caught. Edmund felt heat rise to his face, an unfamiliar sensation. "I preferred to deliver them personally, to ensure clarity." "I see." Her amusement was gentle, not mocking. "Would you like to see what I've done with the roses since you were here? You seemed interested last time." Edmund should decline, have her sign the papers, leave immediately. Instead, he said, "I would, very much." They walked the garden paths together, Amelia pointing out new blooms, explaining her father's careful planning, early varieties giving way to mid-season, then late bloomers ensuring color from May through October. "This is Papa's favorite," she said, stopping before a particularly lovely pink rose. "Heritage. He planted it the year I was born." She touched the petals gently. He said it would outlast him, and he was right. The conversation drifted beyond flowers to family, loss, the weight of expectations. Amelia spoke of her father's death with honest grief but no self-pity. He made terrible mistakes. The gambling, the debts, they destroyed everything he'd built. She met Edmund's eyes. "But he loved us." That doesn't excuse what he did, but it makes it comprehensible. He was human, flawed. He tried to be perfect and failed spectacularly. Edmund found himself speaking more honestly than he had with anyone in years. "My father never made mistakes, or if he did, he'd never admit it. He was perfectly dutiful, perfectly composed, perfect." That sounds exhausting. The simple observation struck deep. It was. And you're trying to be just as perfect. It wasn't a question, it was understanding. It's what's expected, Edmund said quietly. Amelia stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Expected by whom? Your father is gone. The king has many capable advisers. Who are you trying to please, your grace? The question pierced through every defense. Edmund had no answer, because he'd never asked himself the question. It must be lonely, Amelia said, her voice gentle, living only for others' expectations, never for your own. Duty isn't lonely. It's purposeful. Duty and purpose aren't the same thing. She gestured to the garden around them. One is about obligation, doing what you must. The other is about meaning, doing what matters. Papa taught me that. This garden was his duty to maintain, but it was also his purpose, his joy. When he lost sight of the difference, he lost himself. They had stopped beside a bench beneath a cherry tree, dappled sunlight playing across the worn wood. The garden was fragrant and alive. Everything Edmund's carefully ordered life in London was not. What if I don't know the difference anymore? The admission cost him. Then perhaps it's time to learn. They sat, propriety forgotten, and talked. About politics she was surprisingly well informed, reading the papers her mother saved, despite the cost. About literature they both loved Wordsworth's celebration of nature over artifice. About philosophy, duty, the lives we're expected to live versus the lives we might choose. Amelia challenged him, questioned him, saw him as Edmund rather than the Duke of Thornfield. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Edmund realized with shock that more than an hour had passed. He stood reluctantly, and they walked back toward the house in companionable silence. Their hands brushed accidental contact as they navigated a narrow section of path. The touch was electric. Both felt it. Both quickly withdrew. "Your papers," Amelia said, her voice slightly breathless. "You forgot your papers." "Yes, the papers." Edmund had completely forgotten his manufactured excuse. She signed them quickly in the morning room, her handwriting elegant and sure. When she handed them back, their fingers touched again in the transfer, and Edmund felt that same jolt of connection. "Lady Amelia, What could he say? What should he say? "Safe travels, your grace." But her eyes held more than the formal words conveyed. Edmund rode back to London in turmoil, his horse sensing his mood and tossing its head nervously. The summer evening was beautiful, the kind of pastoral perfection that poets celebrated, but Edmund barely noticed. He was more unsettled now than before, because now he knew with certainty this wasn't mere intellectual respect or idle attraction. This was something far more dangerous. This was the thing his father had warned against, the thing duty demanded he resist, the thing that could destroy everything he'd built. And God help him, he didn't care. Chapter 4. The Ball. The Royal Ball at St. James's Palace was London's social event of the season, and it showed in every excessive detail. Crystal chandeliers blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off gold leaf that covered the ceiling in elaborate patterns. An orchestra filled the gallery, their music weaving through conversations of hundreds of aristocrats dressed in their finest silks and satins. The air was thick with competing perfumes and colognes, the rustle of expensive fabric, the glitter of jewels at every throat and wrist. Edmund arrived in full ducal regalia, formal coat bearing the Ravenswood crest, ceremonial sword at his hip, orders and decorations spanning his chest. He looked every inch the Duke. Powerful, untouchable, perfect. Inside, he was suffocating. Geoffrey intercepted him at the entrance, his expression concerned. "The king expects you to open the dancing with Lady Catherine." "Of course." Edmund's voice was steady, betraying nothing. "And Lord Ashford is expecting an announcement tonight." Geoffrey paused. "Edmund." "Geoffrey, I know." "Do you?" "Because running from decisions won't make them disappear. You must choose. Tonight." Before Edmund could respond, a commanding voice called out, "Ravenswood, come, walk with me." His Majesty King William IV was elderly but sharp-eyed, his posture still regal despite his 70 years. Edmund bowed and fell into step beside him as they circled the ballroom's perimeter, the king waving graciously to guests who bowed and curtsied as they passed. "I hear congratulations may be in order soon," the king said, his tone casual but his gaze penetrating. "Lady Catherine is a fine match, accomplished, connected, beautiful. Your Majesty is gracious." The king stopped walking, turning to face Edmund directly. "You don't seem pleased, my boy." Cold feet? Not at all, your majesty. Merely thoughtful. The king's eyes narrowed with shrewd perception. In my experience, a man who's thoughtful about marriage is thinking about someone else. The observation struck home. Edmund struggled to maintain his composure. The king's expression softened. Duty is important, Edmund. God knows I've sacrificed for it my entire life. But so is happiness. Consider both before you make promises you can't unmake. Across the ballroom, Lord Pemberton observed the exchange with Lord Hartley at his side. Ravenswood looks troubled, Pemberton murmured. Interesting. Hartley smiled thinly. The golden boy finally showing cracks? Perhaps. And when men crack, opportunities arise. Pemberton's eyes glittered with calculation. Watch him carefully tonight. Document everything. Edmund was engaged in polite discussion with the French ambassador about textile imports when time stopped. She entered on Lady Clara Blackwood's arm, and Edmund's carefully prepared remarks about tariff structures dissolved into meaningless noise. Amelia wore a gown of deep sapphire blue silk, clearly loaned by Clara, slightly too ornate for someone of her circumstances, but breathtaking nonetheless. Her chestnut hair was arranged elegantly, a simple strand of pearls at her throat that Edmund suspected had been her mother's. But it wasn't the finery that stopped his heart. It was her overwhelmed by the splendor around her, clearly out of place among London's elite, yet trying to be brave. Clara chatted excitedly beside her, pointing out various notables, guiding her through the crowd. Amelia's eyes were wide as she took in the chandeliers, the orchestra, the sea of aristocrats. Then Clara whispered something probably outrageous, knowing Lady Blackwood and Amelia laughed. That laugh, that genuine, unguarded smile. Your Grace, the French ambassador's voice seemed to come from another world. Your thoughts on the textile agreement? Forgive me. What? Edmund wasn't listening. He was staring, all pretense of diplomatic engagement abandoned. Geoffrey, standing nearby, followed his gaze and cursed softly under his breath. Who is that young woman? The king had materialized beside Edmund, his question deceptively casual. The one with Lady Blackwood? Edmund's throat tightened. Lady Amelia Westbrook, Your Majesty, a beneficiary of my mother's charitable trust. The king studied Edmund's face for a long moment, then looked back at Amelia. I see. Pretty girl. Yes. You're staring, Edmund. Edmund forced himself to look away. My apologies, Your Majesty. But the king was smiling, knowing, thoughtful, perhaps even sympathetic. Lady Catherine appeared at Edmund's elbow, her expression carefully neutral. She'd been watching him all evening, and she saw exactly where his attention had gone. Who is she? Catherine's voice was quiet, meant only for Edmund. Lady Catherine, the woman you can't stop looking at. Who is she? Edmund struggled for words. No one. That is, a family the trust is helping. Catherine's laugh was soft and sad. You're a terrible liar, Your Grace. I didn't think you capable of it. She touched his arm briefly. Go, greet your guests. I'll wait. It was permission, and perhaps a test of what he would choose. Edmund made his way through the crowd, telling himself it was merely social protocol to greet all guests. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. He needed to reach Amelia. Clara spotted him approaching and grinned with wicked delight. Your Grace, what a delightful surprise. May I introduce my dear friend, Lady Amelia Westbrook. Millie, this is the Duke of Thornfield. Formal introductions followed. Amelia's curtsy was proper, graceful despite her obvious nervousness. But when she rose, their eyes met, and Edmund saw surprise, pleasure, confusion, and fear all at once. Lady Amelia, I didn't expect to see you in London, Lady Clara insisted. Amelia's voice was steadier than her hands, which she clasped together tightly. I tried to protest, but she's remarkably determined. I absolutely am, Clara interjected cheerfully. Now, Your Grace, surely protocol demands you dance with new arrivals. It would be terribly rude not to. She was maneuvering shamelessly, and Edmund should decline. Catherine was waiting. The king was watching. This was dangerous. Instead, he heard himself say, Lady Amelia, would you honor me? Amelia hesitated. She shouldn't accept. This was improper. Everyone would notice. But she said, I would be honored, Your Grace. Edmund's hand at her waist felt like the most natural thing in the world. Her hand in his, light and warm, seemed to belong there. As they began to waltz, the ballroom faded the hundreds of watching eyes, the whispered speculation, the weight of expectation. There was only Amelia. They danced in silence for a moment before Edmund spoke. "You dance beautifully. My father insisted on lessons, even when we couldn't afford them." A sad smile touched her lips. "Grace costs nothing," he'd say. He was right. Amelia's expression grew troubled. "This is a mistake, isn't it? My being here." "Probably. Everyone is staring. Let them. You're supposed to be doing something important tonight, aren't you?" Edmund looked into her hazel eyes, and something inside him broke free of the chains he'd worn his entire life. "This feels rather more important than any affair of state." Amelia's breath caught. The words were too much, too revealing, too dangerous. Their eyes locked as they continued to dance, the world narrowing to the space between them. "Amelia, Lady Amelia," she corrected softly, but her eyes were warm, belying the formality. "Amelia, I can't stop thinking about our conversation in the garden." "Neither can I." The admission was barely a whisper. The confession hung between them, dangerous, true, irreversible. The music ended too soon. Edmund had to release her, step back, resume propriety. But as he bowed over her hand, he whispered, "Meet me in the garden, please." Amelia should refuse, should return to Clara, make excuses, leave immediately. Instead, she gave the smallest nod. 20 minutes later, Edmund stood in the palace gardens, night air cool on his heated skin. Jasmine bloomed along the walls, fountains played their eternal music, and moonlight painted gravel paths silver. Distant orchestra music drifted from the ballroom, muted and dreamlike. He'd done his duty, first danced stiffly with Catherine, who'd said nothing but whose eyes held understanding and sadness, spoken distractedly with the king, made mechanical pleasantries with various nobles. Now he waited in a secluded corner near the rose garden, heart pounding. What was he doing? This was madness. Footsteps on gravel announced her arrival. Amelia emerged from the shadows, Clara's shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night air. They stared at each other. "I shouldn't be here," Amelia said. "I know. This is dangerous for you. I've heard the whispers tonight. You're expected to announce an engagement to Lady Catherine." "Yes." "Then why did you ask me here?" Edmund stepped closer, feeling decades of careful control crumbling. "Because I had to." His voice dropped. "Since Bath, I've thought of nothing but you, your smile, your words, the way you see through all my carefully constructed defenses." Tears formed in Amelia's eyes. "Edmund, Your Grace," he corrected automatically, but without conviction. "Your Grace, you have duties, a position, a legacy to uphold. I'm no one. You're everything." The words escaped before he could stop them. Silence fell, profound and charged with possibility. "You don't mean that. You're caught up in—" "Don't tell me what I mean." Edmund's voice carried decades of suppressed feeling. "For 34 years, I've done nothing but duty. Duty to my father, to the crown, to the Ravenswood name. And what has it brought me? An empty house, an empty life, an empty heart." His voice broke slightly. Until your garden, until I understood what I've been missing. This will destroy you, your position, your family's legacy. Is that enough? To live only for duty? You asked me that once." Amelia's voice was barely audible. "Is it?" "No. God help me, it's not." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "Tell me you don't feel this," Edmund said desperately. "Tell me I'm alone in this madness, and I'll walk away. I'll marry Catherine. I'll be the perfect duke. But you must tell me the truth." Amelia was crying now. "I can't. You can't tell me, or you can't tell me the truth. I can't lie to you." The admission was confession and surrender both. Edmund pulled her closer, their faces inches apart. The kiss was inevitable, desperate, searching, world-altering. Amelia responded, all her reservations melting in the face of feeling too powerful to deny. When they broke apart, both were shaking. "What have we done?" Amelia whispered. "I don't know, but I don't regret it. You will, when you lose everything. Without you, I have nothing worth keeping." They kissed again, longer, deeper, a promise neither should make. As they walked back toward the ballroom, forced apart by propriety's demands, Edmund composed himself at the terrace doors, while Amelia slipped inside ahead of him. "Edmund," Geoffrey stepped from behind a column, his expression grave. "I saw you. So did Pemberton." Edmund's blood ran cold. "Geoffrey, don't make excuses. I warned you." "I don't care." "You should." Pemberton has been looking for any weakness, and you just handed him everything he needs. Then so be it. Think, Edmund, your position, your family's name, the king's trust. All of it means nothing if I'm not alive. Geoffrey stared at his friend. You're not thinking clearly. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking perfectly clearly. They faced each other, friend against friend, loyalty against wisdom. Geoffrey's voice dropped. She'll be destroyed too. Have you thought of that? Edmund hadn't. The realization struck like a physical blow. Whatever you're planning, Geoffrey said quietly, be careful. Pemberton is dangerous. He left Edmund alone on the terrace. Through the windows, Edmund could see Catherine dancing with another gentleman, maintaining dignified grace. The king, watching everything with shrewd eyes. Pemberton, in deep conversation with Lord Hartley, both glancing toward the terrace. And Amelia, standing with Clara, pale and shaken. Edmund realized with terrible clarity. Geoffrey was right. He'd set something in motion that he couldn't control, and it might destroy them both. Chapter 5. The scandal erupts. The week following the ball, Edmund and Amelia moved through London like criminals, stealing moments in the grey hours before society stirred. Clara Blackwood facilitated with enthusiasm, seemingly oblivious to the danger she was courting, delighted by the romance unfolding under her patronage. Early mornings found them walking in Hyde Park before fashionable hours, when only servants and tradesmen populated the paths. Afternoons brought discreet tea at Clara's townhouse, technically chaperoned but with Clara conveniently occupied elsewhere. Once, Edmund rode to Bath for a single stolen afternoon in the Westbrook garden, staying mere hours before racing back to London. They talked about everything, the future, possibility, whether love could overcome the weight of circumstance. I'll speak to the king, Edmund insisted one morning as they walked beneath oak trees, heavy with summer leaves. Explain the situation. Surely he'll understand. Edmund, be realistic. Amelia's voice was gentle but firm. A duke cannot marry a penniless nobody. Society has rules for good reason. You're not nobody. You're everything I want. Want and possibility are different things. But despite her reservations, despite her practical nature, Amelia was falling. Edmund could see it in her eyes, feel it in the way her hand trembled when he helped her into Clara's carriage. Edmund spoke of giving up his seat in Parliament, living quietly abroad. We could go to Italy. I have investments, we'd be comfortable. More than comfortable. You'd wither without purpose, Amelia said sadly. Service is in your blood. You'd grow to resent me for what you sacrificed. Then I'll find new ways to serve. There are diplomatic positions, ambassadorships. They were building a dream, beautiful, fragile, doomed. What they didn't know was that Lord Pemberton was watching. His network of servants and sympathetic aristocrats reported each meeting, each indiscretion, building a portrait of the Duke of Thornfield, compromised by inappropriate passion. Let them think they're being discreet, Pemberton told Lord Hartley over brandy one evening. Let the Duke dig his own grave. When the time comes, we'll simply provide the shovel. Monday morning, 2 weeks after the ball, Edmund arrived at Whitehall for what should have been a routine council meeting. The moment he entered the building, he knew something was wrong. The atmosphere was strange. Colleagues who normally greeted him with respect averted their eyes. Whispers followed him through corridors like smoke. Junior ministers pressed themselves against walls as he passed, as though proximity might contaminate them. Geoffrey intercepted him before he reached the council chamber, his face pale beneath his normally ruddy complexion. Edmund, don't go in there. What's happened? Geoffrey handed him a letter-expensive paper, sealed with an anonymous mark. Edmund broke the seal with growing dread. To Lord Ashford, he read aloud, his voice steady despite the ice spreading through his chest. I write in confidence to express my grave concerns regarding His Majesty's trade policies. The King's naive approach to French negotiations endangers England's interests. A younger, more vigorous monarch would see clearly what our aging sovereign cannot. The Crown's influence wanes while opportunities for alternative leadership grow. Your loyal servant, Ravenswood. Edmund looked up from the page. I never wrote this. I know. Geoffrey's expression was grim. But there are 6 more, each to different members of Parliament, each suggesting you harbour ambitions above your station. Horror dawned on Edmund's face. Treason. The implication is clear, and these began circulating 3 days ago. Geoffrey paused. Edmund, can you prove you didn't write them? The handwriting isn't mine. It's close enough. An expert forger. And there's more. Geoffrey handed him a scandal sheet, the morning's gossip paper. The headline screamed in bold type, "Duke's judgment compromised. Ravenswood court scandal with penniless." "Nobody," Edmund read with mounting fury. The article detailed his attentions to an unsuitable woman of no consequence, suggested his reckless infatuation had clouded his judgment, connected the treasonous letters to erratic behavior, and questioned whether the king could trust a man enslaved by passion. They'd weaponized Amelia. His love for her had become evidence of instability. "The council is meeting now to discuss your loyalty," Geoffrey said quietly. The king demanded it. Edmund straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of his family's 200-year legacy pressing down. "Then I'll face them." The council chamber felt like a courtroom. 30 members of parliament, the king's closest advisers, sat in judgment. The king himself presided from the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Pemberton sat among the accusers, his face carefully neutral, but Edmund caught the glitter of satisfaction in his eyes. The Lord Chancellor spoke first. "Your Grace, grave accusations have been levelled. Anonymous letters bearing your signature." "Which I did not write," Edmund interrupted, suggesting treasonous sentiments regarding His Majesty. "Forgeries, designed to discredit me." Pemberton rose smoothly. "A convenient claim, Ravenswood, yet your behavior lately has been unusual. Explain yourself. Secret meetings, frequent absences from London, distraction during critical sessions." Pemberton's voice dripped false concern. "And your association with a certain young woman of questionable connections." The words were poison, carefully calibrated to sound like legitimate worry rather than attack. "My private life is my concern," Edmund said coldly. "Not when it affects your judgment, not when England's interests hang in the balance." Lord Ashford stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger and betrayal. "You were to marry my daughter. Instead, you insult her by pursuing a nobody. Lady Amelia Westbrook is a distraction, a weakness." Ashford's voice rose. "And these letters suggest that weakness has led to something far worse." The chamber erupted in argument. Some defended Edmund, his years of service, his loyalty beyond question. Others pointed to the timing, his recent behavior, the undeniable evidence of distraction. Geoffrey stood, commanding attention. "I have examined the letters. The handwriting, while similar, is not His Grace's. I believe they are sophisticated forgeries." "Or Lord Wycliffe is protecting his friend," Pemberton suggested smoothly. "I am protecting truth." But even Geoffrey's support wasn't enough. The doubt had been planted, and it spread like poison through the room. The king raised his hand. Silence fell instantly. "This council is adjourned. Lord Ravenswood, you will remain." The chamber emptied slowly, members filing out with backward glances at Edmund standing alone before the throne. When the last had departed and the door closed with finality, the king spoke. "Are you a traitor, Edmund?" "Never, Your Majesty. On my life and honor." The king's expression softened slightly. "I believe you. These letters reek of conspiracy. Someone seeks to destroy you." Relief flooded through Edmund. "Thank you, Your Majesty. But belief is not enough." The king's voice hardened. "I must have proof, and you must demonstrate your loyalty beyond doubt." Edmund's relief curdled into dread. "How, Your Majesty?" "Marry Lady Catherine Ashford, immediately. Sever all connection with the Westbrook girl. Show Parliament that your judgment is sound, your priorities clear." Edmund felt the trap close around him like iron. "Your Majesty, it's not a request, Edmund. It's a command. The wedding will occur within the fortnight. And if I refuse?" The king's expression filled with genuine sadness. "Then I cannot protect you. The accusations will proceed. At best, you'll be ruined, stripped of title, lands, position. At worst," he paused, "treason carries a death sentence." Edmund stood frozen, feeling the weight of centuries of duty crushing down on him. Choose Amelia and face ruin, or worse, the gallows. Choose Catherine and safety, but lose everything that made life worth living. The trap was complete. After Edmund left the palace devastated, trapped, barely maintaining his composure, Geoffrey began investigating in earnest. He visited paper merchants throughout London, tracing the expensive stock used for the forged letters. He consulted the handwriting expert who'd examined the documents. "Excellent forgery," the man confirmed. "Deliberate, practiced. This was not amateur work." Geoffrey interviewed clerks and servants, searching for anyone who might have seen something. Finally, he found a lead. Lord Pemberton's secretary had purchased similar paper stock 3 weeks ago, just after the royal ball. Geoffrey now had suspicions, but not proof. And Edmund didn't have time. The king had commanded a wedding within the fortnight. 2 weeks to save his friend from either a loveless marriage or a traitor's death. Geoffrey stared at his notes in the lamplight, feeling the weight of impossible odds, and began planning how to prove what he knew in his bones to be true. Pemberton had manufactured this entire conspiracy, but would he find proof in time? Chapter 6. The Sacrifice. 3 days after the parliamentary inquiry, Amelia knelt in her garden, tending the roses that had become both comfort and torment. Every bloom reminded her of Edmund, his surprise when he'd first seen the garden, the way he'd listened when she'd spoken of patience and faith, the look in his grey eyes when he'd told her she was everything. But everything had changed. Edmund hadn't written, hadn't visited. She told herself he was busy, that Parliament demanded his attention, that nothing was wrong. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. The sound of a carriage arriving at speed made her look up. Clara burst through the garden gate, her face grave, newspapers clutched in her hands. "Millie, oh Millie, I'm so sorry." The papers told the story in screaming headlines. Duke Ravenswood accused of treason. Royal wedding announced. Ravenswood to wed Lady Catherine. King commands Duke to prove loyalty through advantageous match. And worst of all, Westbrook girl, named as Duke's folly, unsuitable woman, blamed for Duke's lapse in judgment. Amelia's hands shook as she read. The articles were vicious, particularly about her. Fortune hunter, social climber, woman of no breeding who used feminine wiles to ensnare a duke during a moment of weakness. Some even questioned her morality. Proper ladies do not pursue gentlemen above their station. "They're destroying him because of me," Amelia whispered. "It's not your fault." Clara gripped her arm. "Someone is orchestrating this. It's too coordinated, too vicious. It doesn't matter whose fault it is." Amelia's voice was hollow. "He's facing treason charges, and I'm the evidence they're using to prove his judgment is compromised." Mrs. Westbrook appeared in the garden doorway, having read over their shoulders. Tears streamed down her face. "My dear child, you must end this." "Mama, I know you care for him, but if you truly care, you'll let him go. Let him save himself." Her mother's voice broke. "This is destroying him, and it will destroy you both if you don't act." Amelia looked at the newspapers again, at Edmund's name dragged through scandal, at the accusations of treason that could see him hanged. Her mother was right. Edmund would sacrifice everything for her, his position, his legacy, possibly his life, unless she stopped him. That same afternoon in London, Edmund worked frantically in his study at Thornfield House. Maps covered his desk routes to Scotland, then across the Channel to France or Italy. Documents detailing the liquidation of assets, the conversion of property holdings into portable wealth. He was planning to run, to take Amelia and disappear. They would marry at Gretna Green, then sail for the continent, start a new life where the king's reach couldn't follow, where scandal couldn't touch them. Geoffrey entered without knocking, a privilege of their long friendship. He saw the maps and cursed. "Edmund, no, I won't marry Catherine, I won't abandon Amelia. You'll be a fugitive, wanted for treason." Edmund's laugh was harsh. "Better a fugitive with Amelia than a duke in a prison of duty. And what of her?" Geoffrey's voice was gentle but insistent. "She'll be branded a criminal's wife. Hunted, scorned. Every door in Europe will close to her. Is that the life you want for the woman you love?" Edmund faltered. He hadn't thought that through. In his desperation to be with Amelia, he hadn't considered that his choice would destroy her as completely as it would destroy him. "You're not thinking clearly," Geoffrey said. "Love has blinded you to consequences. Then I'll be blind. I can't lose her, Geoffrey." "You may have to, for her sake, if not your own." Edmund refused to hear it. He gathered the maps, stuffing them into his saddlebag. "I'm leaving tonight, riding to Bath to get Amelia. We'll be gone before anyone can stop us." Geoffrey watched his friend prepare to throw away everything, helpless to prevent the catastrophe unfolding. Evening found Edmund at the Westbrook door, his horse lathered with exhaustion. He'd ridden like a madman, desperate, wild-eyed, beyond reason. Davies opened the door, alarm clear on his face. "Your Grace, I must see Lady Amelia, immediately." "Your Grace, perhaps tomorrow would be more appropriate." Edmund pushed past him with unprecedented rudeness. He found Amelia in the parlour with her mother, both women rising in startlement, at his disheveled appearance. "Amelia, pack what you need. We're leaving." "Edmund, what?" "Tonight, now." He was manic with desperation. "I won't marry Catherine. I won't leave you. We'll go to Scotland tonight, marry by week's end, then sail for France or Italy. I have money, we'll be comfortable. We'll be together." He poured out his plan with barely a breath between words. "None of the rest matters. Not the title, not the position. Only you." Amelia listened, her heart breaking with every word, because she'd already decided what she must do. "Edmund, stop. We don't have time. Stop, please. Sit down." Something in her voice, final, resolved, glacially cold, made him obey. They sat, Edmund on the edge of the settee, Amelia in the chair across from him, distance between them like a chasm. Mrs. Westbrook quietly excused herself. This conversation must be private. Amelia had rehearsed this moment in her mirror, practiced the words until they came easily. But looking at Edmund now, desperate, loving, willing to sacrifice everything, nearly broke her resolve. She must be cruel to be kind. "I've given your proposal considerable thought." "And?" Hope flared in his eyes. Amelia forced coldness into her voice. "I must decline." "Amelia, let me finish." She couldn't look at him. "I'm grateful for your attention these past weeks. It's been flattering." Edmund flinched. "Flattering? But I'm a practical woman, Your Grace. I understand reality." She made herself meet his eyes. "A duke's interest in someone of my station? It was an opportunity, a chance to improve my family's circumstances." The lie tasted like poison on her tongue. "What are you saying?" Edmund's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. "I'm saying you were a means to an end. Surely you understand. The trust, the connections, the possibility of elevation." She forced the words out. "Did you truly think I cared for you? A man who lives like a corpse, following orders, never truly alive?" "Stop!" Edmund stood, his face draining of color. But Amelia couldn't stop. She had to make him believe this, had to make the lie so cruel he would hate her, would go back to London, would marry Catherine and be safe. "You're not even a real person, Edmund. You're a title with a pulse. All duty, no passion, no authentic feeling." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back savagely. "I could never love you. You're too cold, too bound by obligations, you're too weak to break." Edmund stared at her as though she'd struck him. "Look at me. Look me in the eyes and tell me that kiss meant nothing." This was the moment. Amelia stood, forced herself to meet his gaze directly, and delivered the final blow. "It meant nothing. You were a duke who paid attention to me. I was flattered. But love?" Her voice nearly broke on the word, but she held steady. "No, there was never love." She gestured toward the door. "Go back to London. Marry Lady Catherine. Fulfill your duty. It's what you were always meant to do, what you're good for." Edmund opened his mouth, closed it. Something died behind his grey eyes. She could see it happen, see the light extinguish. "I see." His voice was hollow, dead as winter. No anger, no argument, just devastating acceptance. He turned toward the door, his movements mechanical, as though his body operated independently of his shattered soul. "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Westbrook. I won't trouble you again." He walked out. Amelia stood frozen, listening to his footsteps recede. The front door closed, careful, controlled, not slammed, despite his pain. The sound of his horse leaving, hoofbeats fading into the Bath evening. Amelia made it to the door before her legs gave out. She pressed her forehead against the wood, and the sobs came silent, violent, grief ripping through her like a physical wound. She slid down to the floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and broke apart. Clara appeared from upstairs where she'd been waiting, listening. She rushed to her friend and pulled her into an embrace. "I had to," Amelia gasped between sobs. "I had to set him free. I know, darling. He'll be safe now. He'll go back. He'll marry Catherine. He'll live." Amelia's voice was barely human, raw with anguish. "It doesn't matter what it costs me. He'll survive. That's all that matters." But she wept, as though her heart had been torn out. Because it had. Clara held her as she cried, stroking her hair, whispering comfort that meant nothing. Outside, the summer evening was beautiful, roses blooming, birds singing their vespers. Inside, Amelia Westbrook destroyed herself to save the man she loved. And in doing so, she proved that sometimes the cruelest kindness is letting go. Chapter 7. The Revelation. Edmund returned to London, a changed man, or rather, no longer a man at all. He'd become an automaton, going through the motions of life with mechanical precision and no feeling whatsoever. He agreed to everything. Marry Catherine, public announcement, immediate ceremony. Whatever duty demanded, he would perform. Geoffrey found him in his study 3 days after Bath, reviewing wedding arrangements with the same detached efficiency he'd once applied to trade negotiations. "Edmund, are you certain about this?" "About what? My duty?" Edmund's voice was flat, emotionless. "She made it clear what I was to her, a means to an end. I was a fool to think otherwise. She loved you. I saw her face. You saw what you wanted to see, as did I." Edmund set down his pen with precision. "I mistook gratitude for affection, manipulation for genuine feeling. An embarrassing lapse in judgment, but one I've corrected." Geoffrey recognized this version of Edmund, the perfect duke. All duty, no feeling. But this was worse than before. Before, Edmund had been controlled. Now he was simply dead inside. Wedding preparations proceeded with ruthless efficiency. 10 days until the ceremony. Catherine tried repeatedly to reach him, to have the conversation every engaged couple should have. "Edmund, we should talk about expectations, about how we'll manage. You'll be an excellent Duchess. That's sufficient." Catherine studied his face with growing concern. "Is it? Because you look like a man walking to his execution. Appearances can be deceiving, Lady Catherine." She pressed her lips together, recognizing the futility of further discussion. She was marrying a ghost, and they both knew it. 1 week before the wedding, Geoffrey's investigation finally bore fruit. He'd spent days interviewing servants, tracing paper sources, examining records with obsessive attention to detail. A clerk at a Bond Street stationer's finally provided the breakthrough. "Lord Pemberton's secretary purchased paper matching this stock 3 weeks ago," the clerk confirmed, examining the forged letters. "But more interesting, I saw Lord Pemberton himself in Hyde Park around that time, watching a gentleman and a lady. He was taking notes." Geoffrey's pulse quickened. "Can you describe them?" "Tall gentleman, dark hair, duke by his bearing. The lady was pretty, chestnut hair, simply dressed. Edmund and Amelia." Geoffrey consulted the handwriting expert again. Could Pemberton have commissioned these forgeries? The expert examined the letters carefully. Possible. He'd need resources and connections to find a forger this skilled. But he has both. And the motive is obvious: remove Ravenswood, advance his own position. Geoffrey took his evidence directly to the king in a private audience. "Pemberton," the king's expression darkened. "I've had my suspicions about him for months. This confirms what I suspected. Your Majesty, Edmund is innocent. The letters were designed to destroy him." "I know, but the proof came too late." The king gestured to the window overlooking the palace gardens. "The wedding is in 1 week. Parliament is satisfied. The scandal is dying. Pemberton will face justice, but the damage to Edmund is done." "But Edmund himself is dying, Your Majesty." Geoffrey's voice was urgent. "I've known him my entire life, and I've never seen him like this. He's given up. He's surrendered to duty because he believes the woman he loves betrayed him." The king turned from the window. "What would you have me do?" "Tell him the truth, about the investigation, about Pemberton's conspiracy. Give him the choice you denied him when you commanded the marriage. And if he still chooses Lady Westbrook over Lady Catherine, then at least he'll have chosen freely." The king considered this for a long moment, his aged face thoughtful. Finally, he nodded. 3 days before the wedding, Edmund was summoned to a private audience with the king. No advisors, no witnesses. Just the two of them in His Majesty's private study, a comfortable room with books and maps, far from the formal grandeur of the throne room. "Sit, Edmund, please." The king's tone was informal, almost gentle. Edmund sat rigidly, awaiting whatever orders would come. "I'm going to tell you a story," the king said, "and I want you to simply listen." Edmund nodded, confused but obedient. 50 years ago I was a young man, second son, never expected to inherit." The king settled into his chair with a sigh. "I fell in love with a merchant's daughter, Elizabeth. She was brilliant, kind, saw me as William, not as a prince." Edmund listened, something stirring in his chest despite the numbness. "We planned to marry quietly, live away from court. We'd have a simple life, a real life." The king's voice grew heavy with old grief. "Then my brother died in a riding accident. Suddenly I was heir to the throne. My father forbade the match. 'The crown requires sacrifice,' he said." Edmund recognized his own story in the king's words. "I was weak. I obeyed. The king's eyes were distant, seeing across decades. I married Princess Charlotte, a good woman, appropriate in every way. We had a respectful marriage. She bore the heir. She did her duty. But I never loved her, and she knew it. The pain in the king's voice was raw despite 50 years of distance. Every night for 50 years, I've gone to sleep thinking of Elizabeth, what our life might have been. I've worn a crown, ruled an empire, had every luxury. He looked directly at Edmund. But I've never had a single day of genuine happiness. Edmund's throat tightened. Your Majesty, why are you telling me this? Because I see my young self in you, and I won't let you make my mistake. The wedding is in 3 days. Arrangements are made. Hang the arrangements. The king leaned forward. Edmund, I knew about the forged letters from the beginning. Edmund's world tilted. You knew? I've been hunting traitors in my own council. Pemberton and his faction have been undermining crown policies for months. I used the scandal as bait. Let them expose themselves. The king's expression was apologetic. I'm sorry you were caught in the trap. Then why did you command me to marry Catherine? I didn't command you. I gave you what I thought you needed, an excuse to do your duty, a way to salvage honor from scandal. The king shook his head. But Geoffrey showed me something today. He showed me a man who's already dead. That's not duty, Edmund. That's self-destruction. She didn't love me. Edmund's voice cracked. She said I was merely a means to an end. And you believed her? The king's smile was sad and knowing. A woman willing to destroy her own happiness to save you from ruin. That sounds like love to me. The kind of love I lost. The kind of love you're about to throw away. The words struck Edmund like a physical blow. I'm giving you something I never had, the king continued. A choice. He outlined the paths clearly. Marry Catherine. Become prime minister. Secure the Ravenswood legacy. Have power and influence. Serve the crown as your fathers did. He paused. Or follow your heart to Amelia. Accept a position as ambassador you'll still serve, but differently. Build a different kind of life. The Ravenswood name will pass to your cousin Marcus. He's capable. Your legacy will survive without you. The king stood. Either path serves the crown, Edmund, but only one serves your soul. And if I choose wrong? The king's smile was bitter with regret. Then you'll spend 50 years wondering, as I have. Don't make my mistake. Choose, Edmund, but choose with your whole self, not just your sense of duty. He moved toward the door. You have 3 days. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. The king left Edmund alone with thoughts that swirled like a tempest. That night, Edmund sat in darkness in his study, the king's story echoing in his mind. His entire worldview had shattered. Duty was supposed to be clear, absolute, simple. Now he had permission to choose, and choice was agony. Geoffrey found him there hours later, lamplight from the corridor spilling across the darkened room. The king told me what he said. Edmund didn't look up. She told me she never loved me, that I was merely a means to an end. Do you believe that? Geoffrey's voice was gentle. Edmund wanted to say yes. It would be easier to believe the lie, to marry Catherine, to let duty carry him forward. But he remembered her smile in the garden, genuine and unguarded, her hand in his during the waltz, trembling slightly, her tears when she'd spoken those cruel words. Yes, there had been tears. He'd seen them even as she tried to blink them back. I don't know what to believe. Then let me tell you what I saw. Geoffrey sat in the chair across from Edmund. I saw a woman who looked at you like you hung the stars, and I saw that same woman destroy herself to save you from ruin. Why would she lie? Perhaps the same reason you were planning to marry Catherine, misguided nobility. Loving someone enough to let them go, even if it breaks you. The truth crystallized with painful clarity. Amelia had sacrificed their love to save him, just as he'd been willing to sacrifice everything for her. What have I done? Edmund's voice broke. Nothing that can't be undone, if you're brave enough. The wedding is in 3 days. Geoffrey smiled. Then you don't have time to waste. Chapter 8. The Garden Redemption. The grandest wedding London had seen in years was about to become its greatest scandal. St. George's Chapel blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames reflecting off gilded walls and crystal chandeliers. The organ swelled with sacred music as aristocracy filled every pew, dukes, earls, viscounts, members of Parliament, in their finest attire. Flowers cascaded from every surface, their perfume thick in the air. Lady Catherine Ashford walked down the aisle on her father's arm, a vision in exquisite lace and seed pearls. her cathedral train flowing behind her like water. She was beautiful, dignified, every inch the perfect duchess. Edmund waited at the altar in full ducal regalia, the Ravenswood ceremonial sword at his hip, family orders spanning his chest, medals earned through years of service. He looked exactly what he was supposed to be, powerful, perfect, untouchable. Inside, he was breaking. The king sat in the place of honor, watching with shrewd eyes. Geoffrey stood as Edmund's witness, his expression carefully neutral. Lord Ashford beamed with triumph. Even Pemberton attended under guard now, but present to witness what he believed was his victory. The Archbishop of Canterbury presided, his voice resonant in the vaulted space. As Catherine reached the altar, she whispered so only Edmund could hear, "You don't have to do this." Edmund met her eyes. "Forgive me." Understanding dawned on her face, followed by something that looked almost like relief. "Dearly beloved," the Archbishop began, "we are gathered here in the sight of God and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Edmund's mind filled with competing voices. His father, the Ravenswood name, serves the crown above all else. His own declaration to Parliament, "The crown is all that matters." But then Amelia's voice, clear as morning, "Is duty enough? To live only for duty? If any person here present knows of any lawful impediment why these two may not be joined in marriage, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace." The pause stretched. Edmund's hand trembled. He looked at Catherine, and in her eyes saw understanding, permission, even relief. "Choose freely," she whispered. "I'll be fine." Her grace gave him courage. "Then we shall proceed," the Archbishop continued. "Edmund Ravenswood, Duke of Thornfield, will you take this woman?" "I cannot." Edmund's voice carried clearly through the chapel. Gasps rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. "What?" Lord Ashford surged to his feet. Edmund turned to the Archbishop. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I cannot take these vows." He faced Catherine, speaking directly to her, his voice gentle. "Lady Catherine, you deserve more than I can give you. You deserve someone whose whole heart is yours. Mine is not. It never was. And you knew it." Catherine's composure never wavered. "I did. You'll make someone an extraordinary wife. But that someone is not me." She pressed his hand briefly. "Go, be happy." Edmund turned to face the hundreds of shocked faces filling the chapel. He removed his ducal ring, the symbol of 2 centuries of Ravenswood legacy, and placed it on the altar. "I have spent my entire life believing that duty was the highest calling," his voice carried to every corner, "that personal desires were irrelevant to legacy and service. But I've learned something these past months. A life lived without love is not service, it is imprisonment. A man who cannot be authentic cannot truly serve." "This is outrageous." Lord Ashford's face had gone purple. Edmund continued as though uninterrupted. "I will not marry Lady Catherine. I will not pretend my heart is whole when it's broken. I will not live the lie my father lived, and his father before him." He met the king's eyes. "Your Majesty, I am grateful for your wisdom. You gave me a choice. I'm making it." The king nodded approval and respect in that single gesture. "I resign my position on the council. I surrender my seat in Parliament. I step down from all crown appointments." Scandalized whispers erupted, but Edmund raised his voice over them. "I do this not in betrayal of the crown, but in service to truth." He descended from the altar and walked down the aisle. Past Pemberton, whose smug expression had dissolved into confusion. Past Lord Ashford, apoplectic with rage. Past hundreds of aristocrats whose world of rigid certainty he'd just shattered. Geoffrey joined him halfway down the aisle. "Need a witness?" "Always." They walked out of St. George's Chapel together, leaving chaos in their wake. But Edmund felt free for the first time in his life. Edmund and Geoffrey ran to the horses Edmund had prepared just in case. They mounted and rode at breakneck speed through London's waking streets, past startled pedestrians and merchants opening their shops. "What if I'm too late?" Edmund shouted over the thunder of hooves. "What if she's gone? What if she won't forgive me for believing her lie?" "She'll forgive you," Geoffrey urged his horse faster. "The question is whether you'll forgive yourself for almost letting her go." Dawn broke as they reached Bath, the honey-coloured stone buildings glowing in early light. Edmund had never felt more alive, more terrified. Amelia stood in her garden at dawn, wearing travelling clothes, a simple dress, cloak, bonnet already tied. A small trunk sat by the gate. This was the day she would leave Bath forever, Start over somewhere Edmund had never been. Clara stood with her, helping prepare, though her face was streaked with tears. "Are you certain about this?" "I can't stay," Amelia's voice broke. "Every street reminds me of him, every garden, every—" She couldn't finish. Clara embraced her. "He's marrying Catherine today. I know. It's what I wanted. He'll be safe. He'll live the life he was meant for." But even as she said it, her heart was shattering. The sound of hoofbeats, fast, desperate, made them both look up. A rider thundered up the street, not stopping at the front door but jumping the garden gate in a move that would scandalize Bath for months. It was Edmund, disheveled, exhausted, still in his wedding clothes, but without his ring. "Edmund?" Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. He dismounted, stumbling slightly, and walked toward her. "Don't leave. What are you doing here? Your wedding." There was no wedding. Amelia's breath caught. "What?" "I couldn't do it. I stood there before London's elite, the king himself, and I couldn't." "Edmund, you shouldn't have. You told me you never loved me." He fell to his knees in the wet grass, morning dew soaking his fine clothes. "All pride, all ducal bearing, abandoned. You told me I was merely a means to an end, that you could never love a man like me." Amelia was crying now. "Edmund, but your smile gave you away. Every time you looked at me, your smile told the truth." His voice broke. "You lied to save me. You destroyed yourself to set me free. You were facing ruin. I couldn't let you sacrifice everything. So you sacrificed yourself instead." He looked up at her, tears in his grey eyes. "I've given up the crown, the title, the position, everything I was raised to protect. Not because you asked me to, but because none of it means anything without you. But your legacy, your family. My legacy is what I do with my life, not what others expect of me. My family name will survive without me, but I won't survive without you." Amelia's resolve crumbled. She fell to her knees beside him in the grass. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was saving you." "You were. Just not the way you thought." He pulled her into his arms. "You saved me from a life that wasn't really living." Their kiss was desperate and healing, a promise made in morning light among the roses. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing. "Well, it's about bloody time," Clara called from the doorway, beaming through her tears. Geoffrey rode up moments later, dismounting with a sealed letter bearing the royal crest. "The king asked me to deliver this personally." Edmund opened it, Amelia reading over his shoulder. "Edmund, your courage this morning gave me hope for England's future. A man who can be authentic in the face of convention is exactly who I need, representing my crown abroad. I offer you the position of ambassador to the court of France. You'll serve England, but on your own terms, with the woman you love. Choose wisely this time. Choose love. Your grateful sovereign, William." "He's giving you a way to serve and be free," Amelia said softly. "He's giving me what I already chose. You." Geoffrey cleared his throat. "The king also wants you to know Pemberton has been arrested for treason, forgery, and conspiracy. He won't trouble anyone again. And the king has officially cleared your name. A royal proclamation will be posted by week's end." "So you're not ruined?" Amelia asked. "I'm not, but I'd have been ruined with you, if necessary." 6 months later, Bath Abbey hosted a modest ceremony that had more love in it than 100 grand weddings. Mrs. Westbrook sat in the front pew, healthier now, smiling through happy tears. Clara wept openly, handkerchief pressed to her face. Geoffrey stood as best man. Amelia's brothers, home from school, watched with pride. Even Lady Catherine attended, looking genuinely pleased, having found her own happiness with a country gentleman who adored her. Edmund wore a simple suit. Amelia wore a beautiful gown made by Bath's finest seamstress. The ceremony was intimate, real, full of love. As they exchanged vows, Amelia whispered, "Are you certain? You've given up so much." Edmund took her hands, his eyes bright. "I gave up what I was told to want. I gained what I actually need. You taught me that the greatest duty isn't to a crown or a title. It's to become who you're meant to be." "And who are you meant to be?" "Yours, simply yours." They kissed as the bells of Bath Abbey rang out, celebrating not a duke's political marriage, but a man's choice to finally live. 1 year later, in the garden of the British Embassy residence in Paris, Edmund knelt in the soil beside Amelia, learning to tend the roses she'd planted. "Patience and faith, remember," she teased, showing him how to prune properly. He wore his shirt sleeves, dirt on his hands, laughing as he'd never laughed in London. The setting sun painted Paris gold beyond their garden walls. "Any regrets?" Amelia asked, watching him. Edmund pulled her into his arms. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." He turned her face to his. "The crown was my duty, but you, Amelia, are my life." She smiled, that genuine, transformative smile that had changed everything. "There it is," Edmund said softly, "the smile that made me question everything I thought I knew. And I'm grateful every day that I had the courage to follow where it led." They stood together in their garden, Paris glowing in the distance, no longer bound by expectations, but free to be exactly who they were. Together, and for the first time in his life, Edmund Ravenswood was exactly where he belonged, not in a palace or a parliament, but in the arms of the woman who taught him that love was the greatest service of all. And so Edmund Ravenswood discovered that the greatest duty wasn't to a crown or a title, but to his own heart. Sometimes the bravest choice is choosing love over expectation, authenticity over obligation. If Edmund and Amelia's journey touched your heart, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. It helps other romance lovers discover these stories. And if you're new here, welcome to Lyra's Romance Stories, where we explore love stories that challenge convention and celebrate courage. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale of passion, sacrifice, and the transformative power of love. We have more sweeping historical romances coming your way, stories of dukes and debutantes, forbidden love, and choices that change everything. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have had the courage to walk away from everything like Edmund did? Or do you think Amelia's sacrifice was the truest form of love? I read every comment and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, check out the playlist linked in the description for more Victorian romance tales. And if you want to support the channel and help us create more stories like this, there's a link to our membership program below. Thank you so much for spending this time with Edmund and Amelia. Until our next story, remember, true love is worth every sacrifice, and the bravest thing you can do is choose your own happiness. This is Lyra's Romance Stories, and we'll see you in the next romance.